Published by Praizion Media. Copyright 2012. Introduction. Effective realistic project management training is crucial for all project managers, PMP certified or not. Praizion Media offers real-world project management training, PMP exam training, CAPM training, leadership training, Microsoft project and communications training in Arizona, California, New York, Washington DC, Virginia, London, UK, Canada, and indeed, the world. Get PMP certified or learn the basics of project management. Praizion Media will train you or your team on site via the internet, CDs, DVDs, MP3s, or through our books and study guides. Our trainers are real-world project managers with experience in various industries, government, engineering, IT, aerospace, healthcare, and more. Visit www.praizion.com or call 480-545-2022 to learn how we can help you build invincible PMP certified project managers. Stop losing money on failed and unnecessary projects and get your project managers trained to be leaders and trailblazers. Visit www.praizion.com, that's PRAIZION.com, or call now 480-545-2022. Praizion Media, real-world project management training solutions. And now, let's listen to Phil, the PMP Doctor.
Hello project managers, how are you doing? Well, today we're talking about the changes to the PMP exam back in August 2011. Now, way back then, there were lots of perspectives as to what the possible changes could be. But looking in the rearview mirror, 12 months later, let's talk about what some of these changes could have been, might have been, and have been along the way. First of all, the general feedback out there on the blogs and the forums is resounding. It is all about the length of the questions. Back in the day, a question could be 2 lines long, 3 lines long. But since the changes in August 2011, the noise levels have become increasingly high about how long PMP exam questions have become. 6 lines long, 5 lines long at least. Different perspectives out there on the blogs and in the forums. It's got to be a lot more than just speculation. It's got to be that the questions have actually been reinforced and are a lot longer than before. So if you are preparing for the PMP exam, be prepared to answer extremely long-winded questions in which all of the text in the questions is relevant. This isn't like the typical exams where you have 5 lines or 4 lines and 2 or 3 of those lines are irrelevant to the answer. In this case, you have questions that are so well fleshed out with every bit of detail in all of those multiple lines. So it becomes even more important for project managers to really, truly understand the art of reading a PMP question, not rushing over the information anymore, not jumping and skipping words, not speed reading, but being able to smartly decode what they want from you, being able to smartly address the key concerns and key needs on each question. That has been a major change in the noise levels that have been out there on the blogs and the forums. If you are on LinkedIn, how about joining the PMP Central group? You will learn a lot from people who come out of the exam, share their feedback, and give insights. So, we can conclude 12 months after the changes were put into effect that this exam has been toughened up, it's been reinforced, it's been put on steroids if you wanted to call it that. It's a very reinforced, tempered exam. And if you haven't been into the details, if you have not been into the art of trying to read a 6-7 line long question to be able to answer it, and I'm talking about hundreds of questions, if you have not practiced with questions that truly test your knowledge, that truly test your understanding, then you are lacking. And that is a key gap, not a knowledge gap, but an experience gap in answering tough questions that you absolutely need to nail down before the real exam. Get prepared to answer long-winded questions. Get prepared to have your stamina tested over and over again. The next big change that we hear about is the fact that these questions could be multidimensional, covering a large array of knowledge areas, process groups, all at once. These questions have been what we term as loaded with various knowledge areas. Time, cost, and scope knowledge could be all in one question. And the absence of knowledge in any of those areas could lead to you answering the question incorrectly. So you want to make sure that all knowledge areas are well covered, well understood, understand the interrelation between time, cost, scope, risk, customer satisfaction, which is managing your stakeholders, and everything else. It becomes even more important now on this new exam to understand how the different processes interrelate. I'm talking about the 42 processes on page 43, not just to know them, not just to memorize them, but to really truly understand how each process relates to the next. What do I get from developing a project charter that leads to identifying my stakeholders? What do I get from identifying my stakeholders that leads to me carrying out other processes down the chain? So for this new exam, I would strongly recommend before your final exam date, you want to explore and fully understand the 5 process groups, not at a high level, but going into the detail and going into how each process relates with the next in a process group and in the other process groups. For example, develop project charter and identify stakeholders. That's in initiating. I need to know that code. I need to totally understand that. I need to understand how I get my project charter. What do I need to get my project charter? Okay, I need expert judgment to put this document together on behalf of my sponsor, if my sponsor needs me to do that. But if my sponsor is proficient in putting together a project charter, I may not be needed. I need to understand, why do I come in here? Why do I, the project manager, have any relevance in developing the project charter? Am I responsible for it? No, I'm not. But I could be given that responsibility to put together some information, not to sign off on it. Signing off on it is not my responsibility, but maybe I could be asked to put it together. Maybe the sponsor could delegate that responsibility to me and sign off on it. So you need to understand the relationship. Ultimately, for the project charter's sign-off, for the project charters being put together, the project sponsor is responsible. But how do I come in? Where do I come in? Do I come in? You need to ask yourself that. Other than developing the project charter, the project manager is pretty much responsible for every other process. Just developing the charter is where you might participate in the act, but you are not responsible for the final project charter. You could be delegated that responsibility to put some information together, but ultimately you don't sign off on it. Those are the type of details I expect you to be able to explain, to be able to understand and comprehend before your exam. How about identifying your stakeholders? What does it truly entail? You need to understand that to get your stakeholders, you need your charter that will help you identify. So your project charter is an input to this process. You need to understand what you get out of identifying your stakeholders. A stakeholder register, what is in it? Have you ever seen one? Well, maybe you need to search on the web for one to truly understand what it means. Your stakeholder management strategy. What is it? How do I use it? Where does it come into play? Then, when you finally understand the outputs, you need to relate those outputs from identifying your stakeholders onto other processes. Your stakeholder register and your stakeholder management strategy, where are they used? So, going back to my initial point, the detail, the understanding, the relationships between the different processes is key. Why you need certain inputs is key. What does the input do for you? Something else I will tell you to be aware of is all of the plans. If it's a plan and it's mentioned in the PMBOK guide, cost management plan, schedule management plan, process improvement plan, quality management plan, and so on. Basically page 350 in the PMBOK guide. You truly need to understand what each plan is, where it's used, where it comes from. Extremely important. So we go beyond knowing things at a high level to knowing relationships. Relationships between plans, between baselines. What are the baselines in the project management plan? Where do they come from? What's in the scope baseline? And questions such as that. Those are the things that you absolutely need to understand. Moving into planning. What do you need to know in planning? Well, I've summed it up. All of the plans, all of the baselines, how you got them, what inputs you needed to get them, where they came from, which specific process was each plan created in. Those questions need to be answered before your exam. If you cannot tell me which process your schedule management plan, cost management plan, scope management plan, and your process improvement plan are created in, you need to go back to the drawing board. And there's so many plans. Plans, and baselines, but you do need to understand where they came from. You do need to understand their relationship. You do need to understand, for example, what goes into creating a risk management plan. What are some of the inputs I need? Very important. Moving on to executing. Something I will highlight here is executing is now bigger than it ever was before. Executing is 30% of the exam. 30%. Huge. If you cannot understand and master the art of human resource management within executing, which is acquire your project team, develop your project team, and manage project team, if you don't get those three down, your exam could be at risk. The new exam puts a lot of weight into executing, and we know there are 8 processes in executing. It becomes so important to understand. Within executing, what are you doing? First of all, you're directing and managing project execution. Deliverables as an output is just not to be compromised. Do you understand where your deliverables come from? Do you remember that they come from direct and manage project execution? Do you remember that work performance information is an output only from direct and manage project execution? Do you really know what that is? Do you understand the difference between work performance information and work performance measurements? Those are a few details that will help you to truly understand and marinate this information so that you can answer questions on point and according to the PMI's needs for your success on the exam. Because if you cannot meet their needs, it's a no-brainer. So you need to get tooled up, you need to get prepared, you need to get into the zone to answer all of their questions. How about the next thing in executing? Perform quality assurance. It's so important to understand the difference between QA and QC. Quality assurance, all about process, all about checking the process, checking the work as it's being performed, not at the end, but as it is being performed. How about perform quality control? Well, that's about checking the final product. So quality assurance, checking the process, quality control, checking the product. And if you've got a defect in a product, guess what? You need to go back and inspect. Why did that happen? How did it happen? And you need to weigh the process all over again. So quality assurance and quality control go hand in hand. You carry out your QA before your deliverable comes out. It's either good to go or not. If it's not, ask yourself why. Why did this go wrong? Take those metrics from quality control, take the understanding, those measurements from quality control, put them back into quality assurance to find out why are your processes flawed in the first place. Not the deliverable. Not the deliverable. We know the deliverable has defects, but we're looking at why. Why did we get it wrong? Where in the process did we get it wrong? The difference there. So quality assurance is in executing. Quality control is in monitoring and controlling. Do understand those differences. Go into the details. Understand how these change requests come back and are used again and again throughout project management. And then after quality assurance, we go into acquire project team, develop project team, and manage project team. Very important to understand what exactly is happening, what exactly is going on, the 5 stages of team development as we begin to develop the team and manage the team becomes very important to understand. The 5 stages of team development. Please get that down, read it, understand it, know it pretty cold. Not on the surface, but really know it cold. Okay? Those 3 processes are just huge. Going into communications within executing, we've got distribute information and manage stakeholder expectations. These 2, you definitely want to nail them down the best way you can, because it all adds up to the 30% of questions in executing. So what is distributing information all about? What am I distributing? Well, reports. Where did those reports come from? Oh, they came from the report performance process. So understand the feedback loops between distributing your information and reporting on performance. And also managing your stakeholder expectations. Very important to know. That is really, truly big. I would advise you go through all of the tools, all of the techniques, and know these details. Going into the next process, which is in executing, conduct procurements. And conduct procurements is all about your bidder conferences, selecting a seller, sending out those RFPs or those other project documents and awarding a contract. It's a very important one. So truly understand there's a multiple array of things that happen here. You send out your RFPs, you answer questions from vendors or prospective vendors rather, prospective bidders. You answer their questions. You hold a bidders conference from time to time on projects, and then you get those questions answered. Those people send you proposals, you review the proposals, you select a seller, and then you go through a negotiating process if sometimes you need to. Begin to negotiate back and forth and then award a contract. And you award a contract and that's pretty much it. And then you move into something else in procurement. But that's it for executing. Truly understand executing. Know all the tools and techniques of conduct procurement. Know what you're doing. Know your inputs. Know your outputs. Going into monitoring and controlling, it can all be summed up here. This is where you're monitoring and controlling the project. So you do need to understand, big term here, variance analysis. What is it? Well, let me give you the assignment to read it up. What is variance analysis? Go into all of the processes where you have variance analysis. All of the processes where you have that term. Know it cold, understand it, know what you're doing in a variance analysis, and understand the difference between a variance and trend analysis and a variance analysis. A variance and trend analysis also looks for trends, but I'm giving you an assignment to find out which process do we use a variance and trend analysis, and which processes do we use a variance analysis. What are we really doing? Earned value management is big. SPI, CPI, CV, SV, understanding the relationships. It's not enough to know the formulas alone, but really understand what you're doing. Someone could ask you the question, you're working on a project, SPI is 2 times CPI. What can you say about the project? And they might even throw in an EV. EV is equal to 125. Give you those other parameters and ask you to work out what does it imply. They may not even give you any numbers in the answer. So you do truly need to know what earned value is and how it relates to what you're working on in the project. How does earned value even come up? What is the earned value? Let's forget about the CPIs and the SPIs. How do you calculate EV? How do you calculate it? They give you a list of different parameters regarding your BAC and maybe your EAC, and they tell you your BAC is this, your EAC is this. You've got XYZ amount complete. How do you calculate earned value? Or you've accomplished XYZ amount of work. What is the earned value? To answer those questions, you really need to be all over earned value, truly understand it. Going into monitoring and controlling at the top there, monitor and control project work, very important. The integrated change control aspect, also in integration, but within monitoring and controlling, very important too. Right here, we're talking about the change control board, how they function, how those changes come into the change control board, what has transpired before those change requests come to the change control board, and what happens after, understanding the steps, very important. Because monitoring and controlling is twofold. You monitor and then you control. Sometimes you need to change. You need to make changes. And that's where the change control board comes in. So everything about the controlling of scope, controlling of schedule and cost, and monitor and control risks, very important. You also need to remember that you have verify scope here, and that's where your customer signs off on the final product, service, or result. Extremely important to understand how this relates back to everything else we've been talking about. You start working on a deliverable. The deliverable is checked as you complete the deliverable, but before you even got done with the deliverable, your team was carrying out a QA. Eventually, the team checks the deliverable and finds out that it has defects. What happens? You need to ask for changes. Change requests are issued. They go through the change control board. And eventually, you're going to have a yay or a nay. Well, if it's a defect, of course, the change control board will say, maybe your technology is wrong. Our technology is wrong. We need to get this done. We need to change our technology and do this again. So maybe there's a change in technology to improve on the deliverable to get it right. So the team starts working again. The deliverable comes out. It's inspected. The team says, oh, this is good. They send it to the customer. The customer says, no, this is not good. This is bad. Puts in a change request, pretty much rejects the deliverable and puts in a change request. And then we go on and on again. The deliverable is reworked. You end up getting a validated deliverable from the perform quality control process. It goes to the customer finally, and the customer says, okay, this is good. I accept it. Then you've got an accepted deliverable, and that goes into close project or phase. So you get your final product, service, or result transition. These are several relationships I've tried to cram up into 1 or 2 minutes, but these are very important to know. Understand from the time your deliverable is created, you could have a series of loops. The deliverable is broken. Rework. The deliverable is good, but the customer rejects it. Rework. The deliverable is good. We say it's good. The customer says it's good. Okay, let's close out the project. Different scenarios. So truly understand the relationships. I'll mention keywords for you here. Validated deliverable. Accepted deliverable. Deliverable. Understand how those three come into play. And change requests. Validated changes. Understand those as well. If you can truly master that, and you can master your variance analysis and your earned value metrics, your TCPI and SPI and CPI, and by the way, the 4 different ways of calculating your EAC, it's also good to understand that. All these will help you out when you focus on the exam. Those questions in monitoring and controlling, they're not going to be a walk in the park. And oh, I should actually tell you, if you haven't looked into this, please do it. Remember, in earned value management, we use graphs and charts. Those graphs and charts are so important. Look into these graphs, look into these charts. Understand how to interpret what your earned value management is by looking at a graph or a chart. Understand how to calculate your SPI by looking at a graph. Understand your CPI, your CV, your SV from looking at a graph. If you haven't gotten to that level of proficiency with earned value management, it's a red light. Go back to the drawing board. Truly understand it. Extremely important. How about reporting on performance? Very important to understand what goes into those reports. What are forecasting methods? Talking about casual econometric methods. If you haven't hit that word yet, I will ask you if you've read the PMBOK guide, which means really read the PMBOK guide. Read it, understand it, go into the details. And finally, in close, project or phase, what do you need to know? You need to truly understand what it means to close a procurement and how that is different from closing a phase or closing a project. So even though we call it close, project or phase, bear in mind that you could close a phase or a project. You could close a phase or you could close a project. Understand that that particular process is a catch-all for closing either a phase or a project. So on the exam, when they talk about phase closure, understand that is the process in reference. Now understand you need to close out, first of all, a procurement or a contract. So close procurements comes first, and then you could close out a phase and then ultimately close the project. So understand these two processes. They're very big. Reading out to you very quickly. On the exam, you've got 13% of questions in initiating, 24% in planning, 30% in executing, 25% of the questions on the exam are from monitoring and controlling, and 8% of the questions are from closing. What does that tell you? That tells you that the heavies, I call them the heavies, planning, executing, monitoring, and controlling, those are huge. If you add those up together, 79% of the questions are from planning, executing, and monitoring and controlling. So not performing well in any of those areas could absolutely mar your exam success. It could really put a drain and a damper on your exam success. So I advise you, please pay attention to the 20 processes. The 20 processes of planning, the 8 processes of executing, most especially, and in monitoring and controlling, you've got 10 processes, and then you've got 2 in initiating and 2 in closing. So truly understand, a lot of weight comes from executing, but along with planning and monitoring and controlling, that could be a very dangerous area. Collectively, that could be very dangerous. Anyone that hasn't focused on one of those heavies could find it very tough to pass the exam. Now, is it possible to pass the exam by not being proficient in one of those areas? It is. It is. You could still pass the exam, but it's extremely risky. I know a student that had a very condensed and compressed timetable and needed to get this done like really quick due to scheduling issues. I mean, if that window of opportunity passed to take the exam on a Friday, that would have been it. What did the student do? Studied hard, got our materials, pretty much went for a boot camp that was like a non-existent class. It was meant to be a boot camp, but he just ended up adding more confusion and throwing sand into what was going on. At the end of the day, this student studied and studied and studied and passed the exam. However, the proficiency, one of the major proficiencies, was lacking. Nonetheless, that student passed the exam. So what am I trying to say? You could still pass the exam, but don't target not doing well. Don't plan to not do well. You need to plan to do the best you possibly can in every area on the exam, because you never know what questions they're going to bring. What you might think they bring, they don't bring. And what you may never have even imagined they'll bring out. So you definitely want to focus. Remember the 80-20 rule. Well, It's kind of different here because when you think about the 42 processes of project management, well, you think about 30% of the exam coming from just 8 of the processes. 30% of the exam from 8 of the processes. So it tells me it's not exactly the 80-20, but it's very close. There's a lot of weight on the things that we typically do not pay attention to, especially in communications and human resource management. So with that, we conclude our addendum to the PMP exam content review. I hope it was of benefit to you. Remember, this is meant to augment what you're getting from the book and the CDs. So listen to the CDs, read the book, understand the changes. Understand the changes. Most especially if you were getting ready for a previous exam and you didn't take it. Know the changes. So, what I advise you to do, buckle up, tool up, take some very, very rigorous mock exams, take some very, very rigorous tests. I hate to tell you this, but there are lots of exams out there that are free and are not necessarily characteristic of the real PMP exam. So if you're taking those Alice in Wonderland type mock exams and getting 90s and 80s, I'm sorry to tell you, that may not really gauge where you are. That may not really characterize where you are. What do you need to do? Take very rigorous mock exams, very rigorous tests and quizzes. Now, our mock exam is one of the most rigorous mock exams you could ever experience. Only 2% of people get a 70% on that mock exam. And it's nothing outside of the PMI context. It's all within the context of the exam, but the questions are really tempered and they're loaded with a lot of information. So if you're looking for a great mock exam to take, what do I advise you to do? I advise you to get our curriculum. Get our curriculum for the PMP exam. Find out more at www.praizion.com. Either go for the 12 CDs or the 12 DVDs. That's the only way you get our mock exam. So sign up for one of those, come on board, take our mock exam, find out where you are. If you don't get up to a 70, it's a red light. You find your gaps, close your gaps. Go in for the kill. Put that exam under fire. Get it done. Come out a success. We see it time and time again. People who put in the effort, take the mock exam, find out their gaps, close their gaps, go in for the exam, they do well. But if you're working in isolation, free-falling, you don't have a coach, you don't have a mentor, you don't really understand what to expect from the real exam, I strongly suggest picking up the Project Management Audio Digest or the PMP Bootcamp DVDs. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all the best on the PMP exam.
Praizion Media is a registered education provider with the Project Management Institute, PMI. Our project management courses are credit eligible for professional development units, PDUs. Participants studying for the PMP or CAPM exam can claim the contact hours earned to satisfy PMI's eligibility requirements for the exam. Project managers seeking to maintain their PMP certification can claim the PDUs earned to satisfy PMI's continuing certification requirements. Our project management training covers real-world examples applied to project management concepts. With a John Maxwell certified trainer on our team, we also offer one of the highest standards of leadership training in content and delivery to our clients. Your team will learn how to connect with people, how to lead from anywhere in the organization, and laws of leadership to propel them to the next level in life and business. Whatever your project management or business needs may be, let us help you fulfill your growth vision for your team. Please visit www.praizion.com for more information. Praizion Media, Real-World Project Management Training Solutions.